Your next Social Security raise is already being decided right now, in July of 2026, and the early numbers are the highest anyone has seen since 2023. That is the part almost everyone misses. The cost of living adjustment for 2027 is not a story for October. It is being built this very month, out of the inflation numbers landing on your grocery receipts and your utility bills today. And the projections that just came out are big. The Senior Citizens League, a nonpartisan advocacy group for older Americans, now estimates a 3.8% raise for 2027. An independent analyst named Mary Johnson, who has tracked these numbers for decades, puts it as high as 4.7%. To put that in plain terms, according to reporting from the Motley Fool, a 4.7% adjustment would be the fourth largest cost of living increase in the last 36 years. By the time this video ends, you will understand exactly how that number is being set, why it suddenly jumped after 2 years of cooling, how much of it will actually reach your bank account, and the one quiet catch that could take a piece of it back before you ever see it. That is a promise. Stay to the end, and you will know more about your own 2027 raise than most people will know even after the official announcement in the fall. You will walk away able to run the real number for your own household, instead of guessing at a headline. Because here is what nobody tells you at the headline stage. A bigger raise is not automatically good news. Sometimes the size of the raise is the warning, not the reward. Think about that for a second. The only reason your benefit goes up is that the things you buy went up first. The raise is not a bonus handed to you by a generous government. It is the system trying and often failing to keep your check even with prices that already climbed. For 3 straight years, retirees enrolled in traditional Medicare watched their raise get swallowed almost whole by rising Part B premiums. Look at the pattern. In 2024, the Part B premium went up 5.9%, while the raise was only 3.2%. In 2025, the premium rose 5.9% again, against a 2.5% raise. In 2026, the premium jumped 9.7%, while the raise was just 2.8%. 3 years in a row, the premium beat the raise. So the money that looked like an increase on paper had already shrunk, sometimes to nothing, before the first check of the new year ever landed. So the moment you hear that 2027 might be the biggest increase in years, the honest question is not how big. The honest question is how much of it you actually keep. And this year, for the first time in a long time, the answer might genuinely surprise you, and in a good way, but only for people who understand the whole picture. There is a silver lining hiding in the 2027 numbers that almost no headline leads with. There is also a catch, frozen into the tax code decades ago, that quietly grows more painful every single time the raise gets bigger. And behind both of them sits a shadow, a date on the calendar, that changes how you should read every raise announcement from here forward. You are going to understand all three: where this raise comes from, who keeps it and who quietly loses a slice, and what people in your position are actually doing about it right now before the fall. So stay with me, because the reason behind this raise is not the reason most people assume, and once you see it, you will never read a cost of living headline the same way again. Let us start with the numbers, because the numbers are the whole story, and most coverage gives you only the flashiest one and moves on. Right now, there are 3 serious estimates on the table for the 2027 cost of living adjustment, and they do not agree with each other. That disagreement is not a flaw. It tells you something important about how uncertain this still is. The Senior Citizens League, the nonpartisan group that advocates for older Americans, currently projects 3.8%. That is the number they landed on after the May inflation report. Mary Johnson, the independent Social Security and Medicare policy analyst, revised her forecast up to 4.7% after that same report, and here is a detail that shows you how fast things are moving. Back in February, her estimate had been just 1.7%. In a matter of months, her projection nearly tripled. The Congressional Budget Office, the official scorekeeper for Congress, sits lower, projecting a more modest 3.1%. So the range you are looking at runs from about 3.1% on the low end to 4.7% on the high end. That is a wide spread, and every retiree in America is somewhere inside it. Now here is why that range matters to you in dollars, not in percentages, because percentages are easy to nod along to and hard to feel. The average retired worker benefit crossed $2,000 a month for the first time this year, sitting near $2,071. Run the math on that check. According to figures reported by the Motley Fool, if the 3.8% estimate holds, the average retiree would see roughly $78.70 more per month, which works out to about $944 over the year. If Mary Johnson's 4.7% projection is closer to right, that jumps to about $97.34 more per month, or roughly $1,168 over the year. Sit with that gap for a moment. The difference between the low estimate and the high estimate is more than $200 a year for a single average check, and roughly double that for a couple who both collect. That is a tank of groceries. That is a utility bill. For a household living close to the line, $200 is not a rounding error. It is real breathing room, and right now nobody can tell you for certain which end of the range you will land on. And notice how the effect multiplies inside a single household. If you and a spouse both collect a benefit, every number in this story doubles for you. 2 checks each getting the same percentage raise means twice the annual increase, but it also means twice the exposure to the deductions and the taxes we are about to walk through. A couple can feel the good news of a bigger raise more strongly than a single person, and they can also get caught by the frozen thresholds more easily, because their 2 benefits stack together when the tax formula adds everything up. That is why a raise that seems simple at the headline level almost never affects 2 households the same way. Your marital status, your other income, your Medicare situation, and even something you did 2 years ago all bend the same national percentage into a number that is uniquely yours. But here is the thing about all 3 of these numbers, and it is the single most misunderstood point in every raise story. They are estimates, and estimates are not the raise. The raise is calculated from something very specific, and this is where most people lose the thread entirely. Social Security does not use the inflation number you hear on the evening news. It uses a narrower measure called the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, known in shorthand as CPIW. That is a mouthful, so just hold on to this. It tracks the spending patterns of working people, not retirees. That is one of the oldest complaints about the whole system, because retirees spend a much larger share of their money on health care, and health care tends to rise faster than the things working people buy. So the index that sets your raise may understate the inflation you personally feel. And it gets narrower still. The official adjustment is not calculated from a whole year of that index. It is calculated from only 3 months, July, August, and September. Those 3 months, averaged together and compared to the same 3 months a year earlier, become your entire raise for the following year. Everything else is noise and preview. That is why July of 2026 is not a quiet summer month for your benefits. It is the first of the 3 months that count. The measurement window just opened. Every number before July was a rehearsal. Now the real data starts landing and it counts. In May, CNBC reported CPIW rose 0.7% in a single month, which pushed the year-over-year figure to 4.4%, the fastest pace since April of 2023. That one data point is why the estimates jumped so sharply, and it raises the obvious question, the one that turns this from a math story into a policy story. What on earth pushed inflation back up that fast, after it had been cooling steadily for most of 2 years? The answer is where this stops being about spreadsheets. For most of 2024 and well into 2025, the direction of inflation was clearly down. Prices were still rising, but a little slower each month, and the annual raises reflected that with modest numbers. The cooling felt permanent, the way trends always do right before they break. Then something changed, and it changed fast. Between February and May of 2026, the trailing 12-month inflation rate surged from about 2.4% up to 4.2%. In a matter of months, the cooling trend did not just stall, it reversed. That is not gentle drift. That is a sharp turn, and sharp turns always have causes. Analysts tracking this have started calling the coming 2027 adjustment a Trump bump, and I want to be clear that the label is not a partisan jab. It is a description of what the data is showing. As U.S. News and The Motley Fool have both reported, the projected 2027 raise is being driven in large part by tariff-related price pressure working its way through consumer goods. Here is the mechanism in plain language. When tariffs raise the cost of imported materials and finished products, those added costs do not simply vanish or get absorbed by companies out of kindness. They travel down the chain, from the importer to the wholesaler to the store, and they land on the shelf price. And the shelf price is exactly what the index measures. So the same trade policy that dominates the headlines in Washington shows up months later as a higher number on the very index that sets your raise. The policy and the raise are the same event, just separated by time. There is a second driver, and it is far more dramatic than a tariff schedule. On February 28 of 2026, the United States carried out a military strike against Iran. In response, Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz to most commercial shipping. If that name does not mean much to you, this next number will make it matter. Roughly 20 million barrels of petroleum liquids move through that narrow waterway every single day. It is one of the most important choke points for energy on the entire planet. When the flow through it is suddenly choked off, the price of oil does not politely wait for diplomacy. It moves, and it moves fast, and energy prices ripple outward into almost everything else. The cost of filling your tank, the cost of running a delivery truck, the cost of shipping the food to the store where you buy it, the cost of heating and cooling your home. That energy shock is a big part of what pushed the inflation number back up through the spring of 2026. So here is the uncomfortable truth buried inside the good news, and I want you to really hear it. The reason your 2027 raise is shaping up to be the largest in years is that the things you buy are getting more expensive faster. The raise is not a windfall. It is Social Security running out of breath to catch up with prices that already sprinted ahead. As the analysts framing this have put it, a bigger cost of living adjustment means retirees are paying more for daily life, and the program is playing catch-up, not getting ahead. Read that twice. Getting a bigger raise and getting ahead are not the same thing. They can even be opposites. When you feel the pinch at the register in the summer of 2026, that pinch is not separate from the raise you will hear about in October. It is the raise being born, in real time, on your receipt. That distinction changes everything about how you should think of the number when it finally arrives. A small raise in a calm year can leave you better off than a huge raise in a year prices exploded. And it sets up the real question of this entire story, the one everything else hangs on. Given a larger raise driven by higher prices, how much of it will you actually be allowed to keep? The answer starts with a piece of genuinely good news, the first in 3 years. Here is where the story turns, and for once it turns in your favor. For 3 straight years, as we covered, the Medicare Part B premium ate the raise alive. The premium rose faster than the adjustment every single year from 2024 through 2026. And because that premium comes straight out of your Social Security payment before the money ever reaches your account, when the premium climbs faster than the raise, your net check can feel flat, or even smaller, in a year the government proudly announces an increase. That is the cruel little trick of the last 3 years. The headline said raise, the bank balance said otherwise. But 2027 is setting up differently, and this is the part almost no headline puts up front. The Medicare trustees currently project the 2027 Part B premium at about $209.50. That would be an increase of only about $6.60 from the 2026 premium of $202.90. In percentage terms, that is a rise of just about 3.25%. Now line that up against the raise. If the cost of living adjustment lands anywhere near the 3.8% that the Senior Citizens League projects, or the 4.7% that Mary Johnson projects, then for the first time since 2023, the raise would actually outrun the Part B premium increase. The raise wins the race. That is the silver lining, and it is a real one, not a spin. What does that mean in practice, for the money in your account? It means that instead of watching your raise disappear into a premium hike, you could actually keep a meaningful share of it. If your raise is 3.8% and your premium only rises 3.25%, the math finally tilts the right way for the first time in years. More of the increase survives the trip from the government's announcement to your check. After 3 years of the premium quietly winning that tug of war, that shift in direction is something worth paying attention to, because it does not happen often. But I am going to be careful and honest with you here, because this is exactly where hope has to meet caution, and where a lot of cheerful coverage stops just short of the fine print. That $209.50 premium is the trustee's projection, and the trustees have a long history of projecting on the low side. Private forecasters expect the real 2027 premium to land higher, somewhere in the range of $216 to $219. That may sound like a small difference, but on a fixed income, every dollar of premium is a dollar taken from your raise before you touch it. If the premium comes in at the high end of that range, more of your raise gets absorbed again, and the silver lining gets thinner. Let me put real numbers on it so it is not abstract. Under a 3.8% raise on an average check, roughly $7 to $16 of your monthly increase could go to Part B before it ever reaches you, depending on where the premium actually settles. At the low projection, you keep almost all of your raise. At the high projection, a chunk of it is gone before you see it. So the good news is real, but it is not guaranteed, and the exact size of it will not be known until the fall, when both the final raise and the final premium are announced within weeks of each other. This is why the smart move is not to celebrate the headline percentage the day it drops. It is to wait for the premium number and do the subtraction yourself. Which brings us to a question that sounds simple but has a surprisingly complicated answer. Who, specifically, gets to keep this raise, and who quietly loses a piece of it in ways that never make the headline at all? Not every retiree experiences the same raise, even though the announced percentage is identical for everyone in the country. That sounds contradictory, so let me explain it clearly, because this is exactly the kind of detail that decides whether the 2027 adjustment feels like a genuine win or a quiet wash in your own household. The headline percentage is applied to your benefit before any deductions are taken. What actually lands in your account is what is left after Medicare, and possibly taxes, and possibly other things, are pulled out first. So two people can receive the very same 3.8% on paper and walk away with very different results in real life. Start with the biggest deduction, which is the Medicare Part B premium we just discussed. If you are on traditional Medicare, that premium comes out of your check automatically before you ever touch the money. For most people, it is the standard amount, the one the trustees projected at around $209. But here is the wrinkle that catches a lot of people off guard. If your income is above certain levels, you do not pay the standard premium. You pay more, through something called the Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount, which almost everyone shortens to IRMAA. This is a surcharge that higher income retirees pay on top of the standard Part B premium, and the amount climbs in tiers as your income rises. Now here is the trap inside the trap. IRMAA is tied to your income from 2 years earlier, not this year. That 2-year look-back catches people constantly, because life 2 years ago may have looked very different. A single strong income year, or one large one-time event like selling a property, taking a big withdrawal from a retirement account, or converting savings to a Roth, can push your premium up long after the money has been spent or reinvested. People are genuinely shocked to open a letter saying their Medicare premium jumped for something they did 2 years back and had completely forgotten about. So who keeps the most of the 2027 raise? The retiree whose premium rises slowly and who is not sitting near an IRMAA threshold. If the standard premium only climbs the projected 3.25% and your raise is 3.8% or higher, and you are comfortably below the surcharge tiers, you come out genuinely ahead, keeping more of your money than you have in 3 years. That is the best case, and here is the encouraging part. For a large share of ordinary retirees, that best case is also the realistic case. This is not a story where only the wealthy win. Who keeps the least? The retiree who gets nudged across an income line they did not even know was there, Because here is the quiet mechanism at the heart of it. When your Social Security benefit goes up, your total income goes up. And when your total income goes up, you drift closer to, or across, the thresholds that trigger higher costs and higher taxes. A raise that exists to protect your buying power can, at the margins, push you into a tier that costs you money somewhere else. For most people, the raise still nets out positive after all of that. But the size of that positive, and occasionally whether it stays positive at all, depends on details that live in the fine print, not in the announcement. And the single most overlooked one, the mechanism that quietly reaches into the pockets of millions of retirees every single year, and gets a little worse every time the raise gets bigger, is the way Social Security itself is taxed. Most people do not even know it exists until it hits them. It is the catch this whole video has been building toward, and once you understand it, you will see why a record raise can be a mixed blessing. So let me walk you through it slowly, because almost nobody plans for it until it is far too late. Here is the part of the story that turns a bigger raise into a double-edged gift. A lot of people believe Social Security benefits are not taxed at all. That was almost true once, decades ago, when the program began. It has not been true for a long time, and the way the tax works is one of the strangest quiet features in the entire system, precisely because it was designed in a way that guarantees it reaches more people every year without a single new vote in Congress. Whether your benefits get taxed depends on something called your combined income, which you may also hear called provisional income. It is a specific formula. You take your adjusted gross income, you add any non-taxable interest you earned, and then you add half of your Social Security benefits. Add those three together, and you get your combined income. Once that number crosses certain thresholds, a portion of your Social Security benefits becomes taxable, right alongside the rest of your income. Now here is the detail that matters more than any single figure this year, so please hold on to it. Those thresholds have never changed, not once since the tax was created. For a single filer, the first threshold sits at $25,000 of combined income. For a married couple filing jointly, it sits at $32,000. Cross those points, and up to half of your benefits can be taxed. Go higher still, to $34,000 for a single filer or $44,000 for a couple, and up to 85% of your benefits can be pulled into taxable income. And every one of those figures, the $25,000 and the $32,000 and the $34,000 and the $44,000, is frozen solid. They were written into law decades ago and have never been adjusted for inflation. Never. You see the trap now. Every year, the cost of living adjustment raises your benefit. That is the entire point of it, to help you keep pace with prices. But the thresholds that decide whether that benefit gets taxed never move an inch. So every raise, by design, pushes a little more of the retired population above those frozen lines, and pushes people who were already above them into having an even larger share of their benefits taxed. When benefits were small, almost nobody hit these numbers. Now that the average check is over $2,000 a month, which is over $24,000 a year all by itself, a single retiree with almost any additional income at all is already brushing up against that first $25,000 line. And here is the cruel arithmetic. The bigger the raise, the harder this bites. A 4.7% adjustment, the largest in years, does far more to drag people across those unmoving thresholds than a small raise ever could. The raise gives with one hand, and this frozen tax quietly takes back with the other. It is not a coincidence, and it is not an accident. It is simply a rule that was never updated, working exactly as written in a world where the dollar amounts. It was built for stopped making sense a long time ago. Let me make it concrete with a simple picture. Imagine a single retiree whose combined income has been sitting just under $25,000, paying no tax on their benefits at all. The 2027 raise arrives, adds around $950 to their annual benefit, and suddenly their combined income crosses the line. Now a portion of their Social Security is taxable for the first time in their life, not because they got rich, but because the raise meant to protect them pushed them over a line that has not moved since the 1980s and 1990s. Multiply that quiet moment across millions of households, and you understand why the honest answer to how much of the raise you keep is never just the premium math. It is the premium and IRMAA and this frozen tax, all pulling in the same direction, all reaching for the same raise. And behind all three of them sits a shadow far larger than any single deduction, one that determines whether raises like this can even continue in the years ahead. Step back from your own check for a moment, because there is a much larger force in this story, and it should change how you read every raise from here forward. A cost of living adjustment is money paid out. Every dollar of every raise comes from somewhere, and for Social Security, that somewhere is the trust fund, the reserve that has been the program's backstop for generations. It is the cushion that lets the system pay full benefits even when the money coming in from payroll taxes falls short of the money going out. And that cushion is running down. According to the 2026 Trustees Report, the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund, which is the specific part of Social Security that pays retirement benefits, is now projected to have its reserves depleted in the fourth quarter of 2032. Let that land. That is not a distant, abstract someday. That is roughly 6 years from now. A child starting first grade this fall would still be in elementary school when that date arrives. Now, here is what depletion actually means, because the word gets tossed around in a way that frightens people for the wrong reasons. It does not mean Social Security disappears. It does not mean the checks stop. Payroll taxes keep flowing in from every working paycheck in the country, and those taxes alone would still cover the large majority of scheduled benefits. But if the reserve runs dry and nothing in the law changes to fix it, the program would only be able to pay a portion of what it currently promises. The trustees estimate that portion could mean sweeping cuts of up to 22%. Picture your check shrinking by more than a fifth, not because of a premium, not because of a tax, but because the fund behind it simply hit empty. That is the scenario the 2032 date points to if Washington does nothing. Now connect that back to the raise, because this is the link that almost no cheerful headline about a big 2027 adjustment will ever draw for you. A larger cost of living adjustment means more money flowing out of that already shrinking reserve, faster. As the Motley Fool has reported, higher annual adjustments push far more capital out of the trust fund than the projections assumed, which can actually pull the depletion timeline closer rather than further away. Read the tension in that carefully. The very same big raise that helps you keep pace with prices today may, added up across tens of millions of beneficiaries, speed up the arrival of the day the fund runs short. What protects your buying power this year draws down the reserve that is supposed to protect your benefit in the next decade. It is a genuine conflict built right into the design of the system. If the number 2032 sounds familiar to you, it should. Washington has been circling that date for a while now, and the projected date has shifted before as the economy and the estimates changed. The point of telling you this is not to alarm you into believing your benefits vanish next year. They will not. The vast majority of your benefit is funded by ongoing payroll taxes no matter what happens to the reserve. The point is to make you a clearer-eyed reader of your own retirement and of every raise headline you will ever see again. A big raise is not a signal that the system is flush with cash. Very often it is the opposite. It is a signal that prices are climbing and the reserve is draining faster to keep up with them. That is why the retirees who navigate this best do not treat these announcements as a windfall to go spend the moment it hits. They treat them as information, as a signal to plan around, not a prize to cash in. And that leads directly to the practical question you have almost certainly been waiting for this entire time. Given all of this, the premium, the surcharges, the frozen tax, and the shadow of 2032, what can an ordinary person actually do about any of it? Before we get to what you can do, it helps to look backward for a moment, because this is not the first time retirees have been handed a raise that looked enormous on paper. History has a lesson here, and it is a sobering one. The last time the cost of living adjustment ran this hot was the stretch that produced the 2023 raise of 8.7%, the largest single increase in more than 4 decades, and the 2022 raise of 5.9% before it. To anyone reading the headline, those looked like extraordinary windfalls. A raise of 8.7% sounds like a life-changing amount of money, especially to someone on a fixed income who had grown used to raises of 1 or 2%. And yet ask the retirees who actually lived through those years how much better off they felt, and you will hear a very different story than the headline promised. The reason is the same one running through this entire video. Those giant raises did not arrive in calm years. They arrived because prices had exploded, and the raise was chasing the damage that had already been done. In 2022, the cost of groceries, gasoline, rent, and nearly everything else surged faster than many people had seen in their adult lives. The 8.7% raise that followed was not the government making retirees richer. It was the government trying, after the fact, to patch a hole that inflation had already torn through household budgets months earlier. By the time the bigger check arrived in January, the higher prices had been draining wallets for a full year already. The Senior Citizens League, the same group projecting the 2027 raise, has for years documented a hard truth that almost never makes the evening news. Despite decades of these annual adjustments, the real buying power of a typical Social Security benefit has steadily eroded over time. The raises keep the number on the check moving up, but the number of things that check can actually buy has drifted down across the years. Part of the reason is the very design flaw we talked about earlier, that the raise is calculated from an index measuring the spending of working people rather than retirees, who spend far more of their money on health care, one of the fastest rising costs of all. So the index consistently undercounts the inflation that older Americans actually live with. Year after year, the raise falls a little short of the real world, and the gap compounds quietly. This is the perspective to carry into the 2027 number. When you hear that this could be the biggest raise since 2023, do not hear a promise that you are about to get ahead. Hear an echo of 2022 and 2023, when big raises followed big price spikes and left many retirees running in place at best. History does not repeat exactly, and the silver lining on the Medicare premium this year is genuinely encouraging in a way those earlier years were not. But the deeper pattern holds. The size of a raise tells you how much pain already happened. It does not tell you that relief is coming. The people who understood that in 2023 spent their raise carefully and were glad they did. The people who treated it as found money and spent it freely often found, a year later, that it had quietly evaporated into higher prices they were already paying. That memory is worth keeping close as the 2027 figure takes shape. Let me be careful and clear here, because what follows is information, not advice, and every household situation is genuinely different. But there are steps that people in your position are actively considering right now, and simply understanding them puts you in a far stronger position than passively waiting for the October announcement and hoping for the best. Knowledge is the tool. Here is how people are using it. Start with the one thing that is entirely within your control, which is knowing your own combined income. Because the frozen tax thresholds are the trap that quietly catches people who never saw it coming, the single most useful thing you can do is figure out where your combined income actually sits relative to those lines. That means the $25,000 line if you are single, or the $32,000 line if you are married and filing jointly, and the higher $34,000 and $44,000 lines above them. Many people sit down with last year's tax return, find their adjusted gross income, add any non-taxable interest, add half of their annual Social Security benefit, and see exactly where they land. If you discover you are sitting just below one of those thresholds, then you know a raise could tip you over. And knowing that in advance is the entire difference between being blindsided in April and being prepared in advance. For those who are near an IRMAA threshold, the higher income surcharge on Medicare, timing becomes everything, and this is precisely where people bring in a qualified professional rather than guessing. Because IRMAA looks back 2 years at your income, a large one-time event this year can raise your Medicare premium 2 full years down the road, when you have long since forgotten about it. This is why some people deliberately spread out large withdrawals from retirement accounts across several years, rather than taking one big lump, specifically to avoid crossing an income line that would trigger a surcharge. Others look carefully at the timing of a Roth conversion, or the sale of a home or an investment, with those 2-year consequences in mind. These are not decisions to make on instinct or from a video. They are exactly the kind of situation where a tax professional or a financial planner earns their fee many times over, because the right move depends entirely on your specific numbers, and the wrong move can cost you for years. It also helps to know where the official numbers actually live, so you are not relying on second-hand headlines. Your own benefit amount, your earnings record, and your estimated future payments all sit in your personal account on the Social Security Administration's website, and checking it costs nothing. People who log in once or twice a year are rarely surprised by their own check, because they already know the starting number the raise will be applied to. That matters, because the national average of $2,071 is just that, an average. Your check might be well above it or well below it, and the raise you personally receive is your own benefit multiplied by the percentage, not the average multiplied by it. Knowing your real starting figure turns every estimate in this video from an abstract national story into a number you can actually run for your own household. There is also the plain matter of withholding, which trips up more retirees than almost anything else. Many people are genuinely startled at tax time to discover they owe money on their Social Security benefits, because nothing was withheld from those benefits during the year, and they had no idea any of it was taxable. If a bigger 2027 raise pushes more of your benefit into taxable territory, some people choose to have taxes withheld directly from their Social Security payments, so that they are not hit with a surprise bill and a possible underpayment penalty on top of it the following spring. Whether that makes sense for you depends on your full financial picture, and it is worth asking someone who can actually see that whole picture before you decide. And finally, watch the calendar, because you now understand something that most people around you simply do not. The 3 months that decide your entire raise are July, August, and September of 2026. The inflation reports that land across those 3 months are, quite literally, your raise being calculated in real time, brick by brick. You do not need to obsess over every release or refresh a website all summer. But you also never again have to be caught flat-footed in October, the way most people are, reacting to a number that seems to appear out of nowhere. When the official figure comes out, you will already understand exactly what built it, and you will be ready to ask the right questions about your own situation instead of just cheering the headline or groaning at it. That quiet readiness, that clarity while everyone else is guessing, is worth more than any single percentage point on the raise itself. And it leads directly to the last thing you need to keep your eye on as the summer unfolds. So where does all of this leave you right now, as the summer of 2026 plays out? The most important thing to hold on to is that the 2027 cost of living adjustment is not final and will not be final for months. Everything you have heard so far, the 3.8% from the Senior Citizens League, the 4.7% from Mary Johnson, the 3.1% from the Congressional Budget Office, is an estimate built on data that is still coming in. None of them is the raise. The number becomes real only after the inflation figures for July, August, and September are counted and averaged. The Social Security Administration will announce the official 2027 adjustment in October of 2026, and it takes effect with the checks that go out in January of 2027. Until that October announcement, the number can still drift up or down with every monthly report. So here is what to watch in plain and practical terms now that you know how the machine works. First, watch the monthly inflation figures across the summer, because those are the rays being assembled in front of you, one report at a time. Second, watch whether the inflation surge that started in the spring holds steady, cools off, or climbs even higher, because that single trend is what determines whether the final number lands near the low estimate or the high one, and that difference is real money in your pocket. Third, watch the Medicare Part B premium announcement in the fall, because that is the number that decides how much of the raise you actually get to keep. And remember what we said, that the trustees' projection of around $209 tends to run lower than what independent forecasters expect. Do the subtraction yourself when both numbers are out. And fourth, keep half an eye on Washington itself, on any movement around the frozen tax thresholds that have not budged in decades. and on the trust fund's path toward that 2032 date, because those are the forces working quietly in the background of every raise you will ever receive. The one idea to carry with you, above all the numbers, is this. A big raise is not the same thing as being better off. The size of the 2027 adjustment is a measure of how much prices climbed, not a measure of how much richer you became. The retirees who come out ahead are never the ones who spend the raise the day it lands in their account. They are the ones who understood where it came from, knew which threshold sat near their own income, waited to see the premium before they celebrated, and asked the right questions well before the fall. As of right now, you are one of those people. You know the raise is being decided this summer. You know why it grew and that the reason is higher prices, not generosity. You know the silver lining and you know the catch. And you know the shadow standing behind all of it. That knowledge is the real takeaway here. Use it to plan calmly, not to panic, and you will handle whatever number arrives in October far better than the millions of people hearing it for the first time. This video is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Laws and policies change. Always consult a qualified professional before making any financial decisions.